Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR. I'm George Binns, and this evening we're into our third series on the recent teachers' strike. And as you recall, the teachers had their point of view, and the president of the school board had her point of view. And now we get into the issue of how does the city council get involved in it? And to help us understand that, guest this evening is Hannah Bowen, City Councilor At Large. Welcome, Hannah.
Thanks, George.
So the strike had gone on for 8 to 10 days, I guess. And you put a resolution before the City Council that said a resolution to support funding students and educators' success. And essentially what you were saying, I guess, is that the City Council would support an additional increment in the budget to help finish the negotiations and settle it.
Well, what it really said was that the City Council was ready to have that discussion and wanted to see the negotiations close and get to that next point.
Yeah.
Because the difficulty for the City Council in a situation like this is we don't have authority over the negotiations. And we don't want to and shouldn't get out ahead of what the outcomes might be.
Yeah.
So we couldn't commit, and I wouldn't have been comfortable committing to say there's a specific amount of money we want to see on the table. That's not our role. That's why we elect school committee members, why we elect a mayor. But what we could say was, this has gone on long enough. We're ready for our step in the process, which is after negotiations have been concluded, if more funding is needed, we're part of that process of figuring out where that money should come from, if there need to be cuts somewhere else, or there needs to be a discussion about the revenues. Like that is our role, and we're ready for it. We want to see that. We'll act on it quickly. We won't, add more time to the process. So that was really the core of it.
Yeah.
And also to be able to really highlight some of the things that I think we as a whole community, including our teachers and our teachers union, our school committee, really all have these kind of shared goals around what we want our student experience to be like, what we want our educator experience to be like. So in the midst of a tense negotiation and a strike, it can be easy to lose sight of those shared goals, and this was a chance to bring those back front and center too.
Yeah. So eventually the discussion went around and round, and it was voted down 6-3. Pretty obvious that most of the City Council was not in favor of doing anything.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that the councilors weren't in favor of doing anything, because they showed up ready to have the discussion. And really that's what a resolution of this sort is about. So it's true, there were not a majority of councilors ready to make a shared statement in a formal way. There were definitely a majority of councilors ready to share their views on the issue. And the only way for us to do that is with something formally filed for us to discuss.
Yeah, you got to have something on the table to talk about.
Yeah.
And that gets to the next point. What were some of the comments that were made? Are they all negative, all positive, or mixed, or what? Yeah,
I think it really showed the full breadth of the complexity of the negotiations and of views across our city on them, which is what the council is supposed to do, right? I think if we all have the same view on something, we're probably missing some of the voices in the city. So it's really helpful to have that forum and see that as city leaders, we understand all the different points of view that residents, business owners, city employees, municipal staff, that they're bringing to us, that we're hearing those things, we're factoring them into decision making. So some of the points that came up were around, the tightness of our budget and how that's probably only going to get more challenging in the next few years. We may lose federal funding, we may lose state funding compared to where we are right now, and that's going to be a real challenge. We can't overextend ourselves on recurring costs. We have to think about the infrastructure and one-off costs that we have coming as well. And at the same time, we want, as you and I have talked about before, we want to be a city where municipal staff, where educators, firefighters, police, city hall staff can afford to live as well. And so just really understanding that the negotiation centered around, some financial elements that were going to inherently be difficult. Yeah. That was, we heard both sides of that, that real difficult negotiation voiced. And I think we heard, and I was happy that other councilors raised as well, just the issues around how we demonstrate some of the respect for each other in a difficult conversation, how we account for things that are not financial but have to do with how we do business. And so in the school setting, I think a lot of the discussions through the course of the negotiations were about just how much schools keep changing and the needs of students and the needs of educators keep evolving, and we need to keep up with that. So thinking about some of though they may have financial implications, some of the non-financial elements of the negotiations around, recess time and planning time and things like that. Just, I think being able to voice that publicly too.
That really gets into the issue of what sort of input do the teachers have into how the system is run?
Yeah.
And they're employees of the city. Mm-hmm. They're not technically in the management decision-making process. Yeah. But in reality, they're the ones that are on the front line doing the day-to-day work. Yeah. And they know what's going on. Yeah. And they recognize these changes. And I guess part of their issue was we should have a voice in how things are changed. Yeah. And I guess that's one of the outcomes of the negotiation. They got a seat on the committee.
Yeah, they've got some working groups too coming out of that.
So eventually it turned out that 2 or 3 days after the vote,
the next day,
the decision was made that we settle it. Mm-hmm. So to my way of thinking, I think that was probably a key motion that the school committee and the teachers finally recognized that, hey, this has got to end. There ain't no more. You got what you're going to get. Yeah. And that ended it. So it's resolved. Yeah. Is there more work to be done? Yeah, and they'll probably have another discussion in several more years about this thing.
I'm sure.
But we get to the other question, too, of why did this drag out so long? And back to your day job of essentially resolving issues, conflicting issues, and how could this have been run better?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think I'll preface anything I say with, it's hard to be in that room, and I think everyone on both sides of the negotiations, both negotiating teams, were trying to keep our kids in school and trying to negotiate the best deal they could to balance those competing interests. So I don't think anyone went into that with any bad faith. And still, as you said, the process did not go the way any of us would have liked. So I think there's a few things when I think about helping people negotiate. I really try and help people speak directly to each other and express what are the things that are most important and be really clear about that. And sometimes people are hesitant, especially if there isn't a lot of trust or there's fear that the other side might not be negotiating in good faith or might be unreasonable in their demands. There can be resistance to putting your own sort of best offers on the table. But really that's part of what a real deep negotiation has to get to. What are the things that are non-negotiables for you? And being really clear about the things that are most important and the areas where you can get creative. And that space for creativity is key, because I think in the end it did come down to more than just money. Most negotiations are, even if they're a financial negotiation, they're about other things besides money. And getting those things clearly on the table, it comes down to feeling respected. It comes down to feeling like you have a voice. It comes down to feeling like there is give and take in the process. And so there are different ways to create that sense. Some communities try and set up in advance a little bit more sort of public grounding into, okay, and we do this to some extent every year with a joint meeting of the City Council and the school committee before budget season really gets underway, where we say, here's kind of the lay of the land based on the financial forecast, based on what we're seeing. Here's the broad outline. You know, we don't have hundreds of millions of dollars lying around. We have roughly this, and this is kind of how we're going to be working. So some communities going into a negotiation that they know is going to be difficult because of all those constraints will have that kind of opening meeting very publicly, get everything out on the table. You know, obviously you may hold back some negotiating tactics, but get the basic numbers out there. So everyone's talking about the same school enrollment, the same class sizes, the same existing budget numbers, the same salary scales, a lot of the stuff that we were hearing very different perspectives on throughout the negotiations. Some communities will just get that out right up front so that there isn't confusion. Everyone is at least working from the same set of constraints and priorities, and even agreeing on, okay, these are some of the most important things that we share. So while there may be areas we're going back and forth a lot, there are some of these things that we can say right up front, we share the same goals. So I think that can help set the stage for that trust and leave less room for people to be talking past each other. Because that's one of the things that I have heard a lot and was feeling myself, that it felt like towards the end of the process, we were getting very different information from the two negotiating teams. And it's not that either side was presenting wrong information, it's that they were presenting information from such different starting points or such different parameters that there was no way to match it up.
Their perspectives were totally different.
And that just leaves people feeling like, oh, nobody's telling me the truth because they can't get things to line up. That's not helpful for anyone. So.
You wouldn't get to the point of saying, this is the sticking point.
Right.
This is the one thing that's holding this up.
Yeah.
So until you can get the negotiation down to that thing that says, yeah, we can do this, or no, we can't.
Yeah.
I mean, that gets to be the problem.
Yeah.
And
or, no, we can't do this, but what are the other things that would make not getting that thing more bearable?
Yeah.
Right? So a lot of times, no one goes into teaching to become a billionaire.
No.
Right? So we know there are other things that matter to teachers. And similarly, no one is trying to manage the city finances to make a profit. It's a government.
Yeah.
So where we're trying to keep costs down or be reasonable about where we're investing money.
It's a service industry.
Yeah, we're just trying to do that to be responsible with the funds, not to eke out money for something else.
One of the discussions you and I have had offline is about the actual structure of it. And one of the things that bothered me about it was the mayor and the city sets the budget, not the school committee, but yet the school committee is negotiating with the teachers, and the school committee really doesn't have much authority to change things. So they're sort of stuck with, and to me this sounds so much like negotiating a new car deal, where you go in and you talk to the salesman, and he says,
Let me
I got to go talk to the manager.
Yeah.
And it makes things somewhat different.
Yeah.
And I was relating back to way back when I was on the school committee, and we negotiated a teacher's contract. And whatever we decided with the teachers, that set the city budget.
Yeah.
So in the grand scheme of things, when we went to a strong mayor type of government and rewrote the charter, as you were pointing out to me, some of the things that the school committee could do can't do anymore. And this was a statewide thing too.
Yeah. And And I think there's still some things the school committee can do. And it's a difficult position for both negotiating teams, right?
Yeah.
Because the school committee has a negotiating subcommittee, and the union has a negotiating subcommittee.
Yeah.
And so, yes, on the city side, any offers that are being made are eventually going to need to translate into the budget. And the school committee is not setting that full city budget. They are presenting what the school committee feels the school system needs to succeed as part of the budget process. But also on the union side, whatever they are putting on the table or agreeing to, they need their membership to ratify. So it's both teams are in that challenging position of representing a bigger group. It's not just a one-on-one salary negotiation. So there is that element to it. And I think on the point of sort of how the budget gets developed and how these contracts help determine that or are determined by it, there is still some give and take. And even under our current charter, the school committee can advocate for and pass whatever budget they feel is appropriate. And that's the first step in the budget process. They then send that budget to the mayor. And of course, the mayor is on the school committee and has a vote on the school budget as that member, but then receives the school committee's recommendation and has time before submitting the full city budget to the city council to consider whether the full school committee recommendation fits in the overall city budget or doesn't. And if not, then can recommend a lower amount in the full city budget that comes to the city council.
Yeah.
And the city council, there's been some debate over the years, and it hasn't been tested, I think, since the change. But my reading of the charter is that the city council could, in the rare event that the school committee recommended a higher number and the mayor submitted a lower number, that the school committee could accept the city council could accept the school committee's number, and that difference would need to still be made up by
someplace else in the
somewhere
budget.
else in the budget. Yeah. So normally the city council's sort of on every other budget line, the city council's option is to approve the budget line or cut it.
Yeah.
There is this nuance around the school committee budget that hasn't been tested and doesn't look like it will be in the coming years, but there is that role of the school committee sort of at the start of the process, setting what they think is really needed for the schools, and then the mayor and city council figuring out how that fits along with all the requests from other departments, and that balancing act that we need to do. So and anything is possible, but
Yeah. So there is a possibility, like you say, that the city council could exercise this option in some future negotiation. And we still have the same problem that there's just so much tax money available.
Right.
And I think that's where the budget starts, that the finance director looks at what the assessed values of the property are, what the tax rate is, what we can use for a tax rate. And I think we've been very fortunate that some of the past years we haven't had to go for the full 2.5%, but now we're being pushed to that limit. And the city is also very fortunate that not only do we get a 2.5% increase, but the property values are increasing. So there's more revenue available, but it's not an infinite amount.
Right.
And I guess the next issue comes down to how much does this new budget that the city has negotiated with the teachers affected the budget? And what else is going to have to be cut? So you start to think about some of the projects that have big numbers on them, like the library adjustments,
City Hall,
the buying of the dollar store. So there's a lot of these other programs that are in process that, what is that going to mean to them?
Yeah,
when
and
does-
it's still an open question, and we did. So we haven't gotten any requests for additional funding before the council related to the schools concluded negotiations. So that there may be, but we haven't gotten anything yet. And we had approved a pretty substantial reserve for negotiations line. Both on the city side, there's a specific line for all the other unions that have been negotiating. And within the school budget, the city council only approves the top line number for the school budget, but the school committee had included within that a substantial amount to cover the expected costs of the negotiations in their first year and any back pay that was needed from the start of this fiscal year to the start of the contract. So it seems like the budget impact for this year has been factored in. We do have a couple of requests in front of us, just cleared out a couple and have a couple new ones coming in from those other unions that are starting to conclude their negotiations as well now. So far, that's all fitting within what had been set aside. So for this year, it doesn't seem like there's a major impact, but for the next few years, the financial forecast does look really tight. So it's always a tool that the city uses to look ahead and say, just how much are we going to have to manage down to the penny and prioritize in advance to make sure we're still on a steady path. And it's looking closer and closer in the next few years. So the initial projections, if we were to keep all of our plans going at 100% and revenues didn't really budge, what kind of a gap would we have? And it's substantial. It's in the like $3, $4, $5 million per year going forward. But that's not the actual budget. That's just the sort of ballpark. Where do we have to start thinking and planning?
It just implies that you better start sharpening your pencils.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And so that pencil sharpening is happening now for the next fiscal year, and there will be some closing to do. It is likely that there will be less spending on roads and sidewalks proposed.
Yeah, that was
as a result.
That already,
Yeah.
that was going to be the main hit.
Yeah.
And because the other part of the concern is, you mentioned this just slightly, is there are other unions in the process of negotiating with the city. And as they see that, the teachers got a good deal, maybe there's room for us to get a better deal.
Yeah.
So it gets to be a snowball effect that one thing leads to other, and with all the unions coming due at the same time, it could be another really sharpening pencil exercise.
Yeah.
Where we're going to get this money from, and sidewalks and the sewers and the streets and the trees.
Yep.
I mean, all these issues.
And there are things that really matter to us.
Yeah.
And it's, I think all cities and towns are struggling with this balance. We've just gone through a really rapid inflation period. Everything has cost more, and our city staff need to be able to keep pace with that as well. And yet our city budget can only grow at a certain pace.
Yeah.
And knowing that, the majority of funds we're collecting are from city residents and property owners. So we have to be very conscious of, in that economic environment where everybody's feeling the pinch already of higher costs. Yes, we want to grow at the same pace so that our city employees are not suffering, and know that we're not overburdening taxpayers. So it is a difficult.
It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
And I think the other issue comes down to the city council approved earlier in the year an initiative to help out the seniors a bit more.
Yep.
And it's recognizing exactly what you're saying, that everything costs more. And those seniors that are really stuck on a very narrow and tight fixed budget, you got to do something for them.
Yeah, we have to account for that, because it's true. It's not that the entire economy, that everyone's income is growing too. There are people who are on fixed incomes. There are people in sectors that have not grown as fast. There are lots of there's lots of different experiences within that. And so, yes, I think being able to provide that additional relief where it's needed, even if so it's this complicated calculation, right, where our tax rate may not be increasing. It's actually tends to tick down, but the taxes that people are paying are higher because the valuations are higher. But as we've talked about, people are not necessarily feeling that, it's a value on paper. It's not a value in their pocket.
Yes.
So being able to provide relief for people who are in that situation where their home value may have increased, but their income has not, and so they can't absorb a tax increase in the same way that someone whose income is keeping pace with inflation can. So we have to be able to differentiate that, and I think that's a helpful tool to have.
And part of this is the effort to start having more ADUs approved.
Yeah.
It's a way to, especially for the seniors, to downsize, stay in town.
Yeah.
Which I know a couple of seniors had to bail out of town.
Yeah.
And be able to keep their property. Maybe
have a little income stream.
Income come in. So
Yeah.
hopefully this, again, in the future, as this gets developed, I don't know of a lot of ADUs going in. I haven't seen anything on it.
Yeah, there's been, if you follow the public notices like I do in the Salem News, there have actually been a lot of requests to the zoning board. Not tons and tons, but probably I've seen half a dozen or a dozen in the last year, where people who are on non-conforming lots, which is a lot of Beverly, are requesting variances to be able to put in ADUs, and so those requests are not just automatic. They have to go in front of the zoning board, ensure that they're not going to impact the neighbors too much.
Then we get into NIMBY.
Yeah. No, but those are moving forward. So the fact that those are happening, I think, means the policy is working.
Well, there's more to come.
Yeah.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And as we indicate, this is an ongoing story that there's no end in sight. But stay tuned and we'll hear more. Thank you very much for joining us. And if you have some comments, my email address is at the end of the credits. Send me a comment. And if you have a longer statement, there's always room for you here at the table.